Welcome to Big Data, Big Danger, which is this year's discussion on big data. I think I'm a bit of a data hipster because I like their early acoustic stuff. About 4 years ago, I did a session at the Battle of Ideas called Seduced by Stats about the unhealthy appeal of statistics. And then last year went on and did some things about big data and mathematical modelling, which they made me do at 9:30 on Sunday morning in the far distant reaches of Frobisher. So they must have been good events, as indeed they were. You can look them up online, because here we are in the big room at a civilised hour with a truly excellent panel of speakers. Why big data? Now, this is a bit silly, really, because obviously if you're here, you see some connection between big data and the bigger themes of the conference, the idea that human judgement and massive data sets that tell us about whole populations may be a tricky relationship to manage, and one that's changing very fast at the moment, which is obviously the key theme of this session. I hope we're also going to pick up and pursue some points from the last session that I and some of the panel were just in about public health, because obviously a lot of that is led by data, and Sheila in particular is an expert in this area. And of course there is the very hot topic of care data, the NHS bid to use health records for medical research, possibly for other research, who knows. So all these are very big topical issues and not ones we can ignore. So it's not just me that has a slightly unhealthy statistical interest in big data, she said rather defensively. We have 4 great panellists. I'll introduce them briefly in the order in which they're going to speak. At the far end of the table, we have Sheila Bird, who is she was the Royal Statistical Society's Vice President for External Affairs, during which time she introduced statistical seminars for journalists and awards for statistical excellence in journalism, addressing something that was name-checked this morning, which was sorry state of mathematical and statistical literacy in the media. So she's already working on that one, for which she's got the Royal Statistical Society's Chambers Medal. Next, we're going to hear on my immediate left from Yann Bonduelle, who is the UK consulting leader of the data analytics team at PwC. He also has done far too many things for me to go through in a short introduction. On my immediate right, we have Marion Oswald, head of the Interdisciplinary Centre for Information Rights at the University of Winchester and senior fellow in law. So she's got a degree in law, obviously. She's a practicing solicitor, but there's a forthcoming publication entitled Seek and You Shall Not Necessarily Find: The Google Spain Decision, the Surveyor on the Street and Privacy Vigilantism. And finally, at the far end of the table, Sandy Starr, who's Communication Officer at the Progress Educational Trust, which means he's also webmaster of their publication Bio News. He holds other positions and has written and spoken for a huge variety of outlets on these related issues, including contributing to books called Crime and Deviance in Cyberspace, The Media Freedom Internet Cookbook, and The Internet Brave New World. I can actually feel the room tilting as we contemplate the mass of expertise, knowledge and intelligent reflection we have here on the platform. So, to start us off with your 5 to 7 minutes, Sheila.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a medical statistician and a Medical Research Council scientist. I'll try to put over 6 points, can't even count. The first of which is that medical data are different. The second is that I am an advocate for well-done record linkage studies, but I have 6 requirements for well-done. And these are research governance, technical competence, ethicality, public interest, transparency, and scientific backbone to resist if somebody tries to tell you to do it otherwise. My 4th point is that deductive disclosure is a risk and is a danger, and it does happen. I've made it myself. Bad examples abound, but generally they are out with research governance, out with ethics, and done for cheapness. That is a disrespect of the public's right to confidentiality. But I'll end with some points on paradoxes in public trust. So why are medical data different? Well, because they are given to doctors under a strong duty of confidentiality, and we put that at risk at our peril. Moreover, when I agree to a blood test or to medical imaging, I do not know what the result will reveal about me, and I cannot rescind the record without in fact damaging my own health. That is why medical data are different. Now, my record linkage, track record, if you like, goes back over about 20 years, includes HIV infections, prisoners, hepatitis C diagnoses, and drug treatment clients, generally hard to reach groups. But without consent, ethically approved record linkage studies for the public good can make and have made discoveries, important discoveries. My own research group used record linkage to quantify for the first time the very high risk of overdose death in the fortnight following release from prison for those who have a history of heroin injection. 1 in 200 is dead from overdose within 2 to 4 weeks. Now, how did we do that? Well, briefly, it was as follows. The research team set the eligibility criteria: male, age 15 to 35, at release in July to December of 1996 to 1999. We reckoned this would net us about 20,000 releases. The Scottish Prison Service applied the eligibility criteria, sent a disc with the names, date of birth, and date of release of those nearly 20,000 individuals to the Registrar General for Scotland, who informed us of the prisoner number of those who had died and the cause of death within 12 weeks of release. The research team didn't have names, of course, but we did have the prisoner number. We also had an extra variable we hadn't thought to ask, but the prison service gave us, which was whether the individual was alive or dead on liberation from prison. And when we got the data from the Registrar General, we found that one of the deaths in prison lacked a death certificate. And the Registrar General doesn't make mistakes, and so we courteously informed the Scottish Prison Service that they might like to amend their records. Scottish Prison Service said, no mistake here. What had actually happened was that the named list, which of course we had no right to see and did not see, had been typed with spaces in it. The Registrar General's software couldn't cope with the spaces. The whole exercise had to be redone, and when we finally got the correct results, they were stunning. There were 57 drugs-related deaths within 12 weeks of release from prison, 34 of them in the first fortnight, 23 over the next 10 weeks. If that 10-week rate had applied in the first fortnight, we'd have had only 4.6 deaths. So 7 times higher risk, phenomenally high risk. But it gives me, as a Medical Research Council scientist, an uneasy feeling that but for that variable that we hadn't even asked for, we could have published something that was incorrect. As scientists, we give up a level of control over data for the sake of confidentiality, but it is something that we are giving up. So back to those research requirements. Let me give you a story of the very first record linkage study that I did, which was linking the terms of imprisonment in Edinburgh prison with the HIV record of with the clinical record of HIV-infected prisoners and HIV-infected individuals. Dr. Ray Brettle, the consultant in infectious diseases, and I both had to appear before Lothian Research Ethics Committee to explain the 3 safeguards that we had to protect against knowledge of the HIV status of any individual and also to protect against disclosure about the prisoner record of any of the individuals. So we carefully went through these, which were embedding, use of master indexing, and Chinese walls. I can come back to those. But at the end of it, the committee said, but what if somebody found out what you were doing? And we said, but of course they're going to find out. We're actually proud of the methodology. We're going to publish it and the results, and indeed we will publicize them. And of course, it did pass muster. But it was an interesting reaction. That was back in the mid-1990s. Now, deductive disclosure as a big danger. There was an outbreak of HIV infection at Edinburgh, at Gleaned Prison in Scotland in 1993. And there were 14 men who were diagnosed as having become infected in the prison. 13 of them had the same virus, the 14th a different. And that 14th man had never returned, never given a secondary blood sample for confirmation of his HIV diagnosis. Years later, in the 21st century, I was doing an audit of fatal accident inquiries into prisoner deaths. And I made deductive disclosure about this man. He had never disclosed his HIV status whilst in prison. He'd only been out of prison for 3 months before he was banged up again in shots, where he died. He died 8.5 years after his HIV infection in Gleaned, and he died of AIDS lymphoma, having never had any highly active antiretroviral therapy because of his decision not to seek confirmatory testing. And he was still active in the prison drug scene at the time of his death, when, of course, he should not have died at 8.5 years in the 21st century. So I'll end with the bad example of care.data. The care.data fiasco. The plan, as you may know, those of you who got an information sheet, was to slough off your GP record with your name still attached to it, unless you, the patient, had opted out. The information sheet was dismal. It would have failed ethical scrutiny. And those who were prepared to receive those named data had lacked the scientific backbone to defend your and my interests. And so there was a professional outcry from computer scientists, from statisticians, from doctors. So we have to be wary that the requirements for good science are met.
Thank you, Sheila. It's very important we're reminded of the potential benefits from the use of big data sets, because while there are pitfalls, the kind of thing we can find out by looking at massive populations are obviously also hugely important. Yann.
Thank you, Dimendra. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, listening, obviously, and contributing, hopefully, to the debate. Title is Big Data, Big Danger. I'd like to add 3 dots and big opportunities, question mark. You've read the press, and you're doing your own research, plus we've heard Sheila talk about some aspects of big data, and most people have relatively strong views about that. I'd like to make a few small points and then start maybe having a few anecdotes. First, let's start with the definition, which is assumed all the time and often misunderstood. It seems to mean very different things to very different people. For me, I'll just give you my definition because no definition is wrong. Big data is the ability to use lots of data to support decisions. That initially begs 3 questions. The first question is what kind of data? I'll start with where I live, and that's given by the GPS in my phone. If you just look at it, you'll see that I spend more time there than anywhere else, and it's accurate at 3 meters. Who lives with me or next to me? What I read and what I buy on the internet, and that's through the cookies that we all love to keep. How I use my phone, an iPad. How I use my car, again, the GPS, what I buy through credit card, debit cards, any electronic payment system, what we watch on TV. And by the way, I said we. I have a wife and 3 grown-up kids, so that is a little bit more mixed up as a signal. Or listen on radio through the DAB system. It also tells you what our neighbors are like through postcode, socio-demographic, and behavioral data. And of course, as implied a very thorough picture of my health profile. There's one thing that all those organizations do not know, or at least they should not know, it's my name. So everything else is known, my name is not known, it's been replaced by numbers. Second question and third question, data to do what and for whom? Two things here. We can use big data to improve health, to improve security, detect frauds, and the list goes on. In which cases, the beneficiary overall is society, and that means all of us in general. Big data can also be used to help me get a cheaper car insurance, for example. It requires me fitting a black box on my car that monitors how I drive, ideally with respecting all the speed limits. I won't say more about that. And ideally not erratically driving in Friday night or Saturday night. If that's the case, if I behave properly, I benefit because the car insurance I get is actually cheaper. The car insurance actually benefit also because they have less uncertainty about handling my potential claims. And by the way, the manufacturer of the black boxes benefit because they sell one more. And that also means the employees of the black box manufacturer benefit because they have a little bit more jobs. I'll now shift to the topic of automatic decisions. Big data, for some, imply decisions are made by computer programs automatically. And immediately, alarm bells ring. I think I can hear them. Let me look at two examples. First, you will probably know that many organizations are already equipped with software that processes invoices. Very boring invoices, but it's kind of important. The software checks, is this invoice matching a contract we have? Has it been authorized by the approved person? Is this the amount within the authorized band of payment? And obviously, do we have enough funds to pay now? That saves the organization time and improves accuracy, which means suppliers can be paid much faster. When the software packages doing that are well-tuned, the entire payment process is more efficient and effective. That seems to me to be a good thing. Although some in the room probably would say, but that's not big data, that's just automation of repetitive, standardized tasks, which is actually quite true. So where does big data comes into invoicing? It's the next step. First, if you have the data of all the payments of invoices that you have in an organization over years, you can start having a much better picture about who you pay how much and when and all those kind of things. It's descriptive, if you wish, of how much you spend as an organization. By the way, that could apply to individuals, but I don't recommend it. That's quite depressing. The second thing that you can do after that, once you have a good picture of what you spend, and you can start predicting what cash you're going to need because you start having some ideas about where your cash is going to be in paying your suppliers. It can also detect abnormal payments. It can also ultimately identify whether you have suppliers that present too much risk for you. Perhaps you have just one supplier in one area. And all of that is starting to move into big data. Second example builds on my car insurance example. What happens if somebody in my family, certainly not me, starts driving the same car and systematically go over the speed limit, sometimes massively, or drive much more erratically than I would drive on Friday and Saturday night, and probably systematically? The car insurance may actually stop the insurance and terminate the coverage. That's not great, but I should have known, right? So we're going back to things that you are essentially warned in advance. So that's a simple example, but then you can carry that to health coverage, and there's been a lot of discussion about health coverage. That may depend on your state of health. That happens in the US. It doesn't happen here. And for example, when your DNA will be known, which could happen, it's getting much faster, that would be a problem. I'm going to start wrapping up. It's easy to predict that big data applications that helps bringing organization much more effectively and effectively will continue to grow. Other applications where the stakes are much more personal are difficult. So I'll talk about three things that I think need to happen. an increased awareness of what data we have, increased choices, and building trust. First, awareness. Do we know what data about us is stored by whom? And how much? So I've checked a little bit at work. We've asked a few questions. I simply asked the question, how many sources of data do you think people own? And I've personally stopped counting at 50. If you want to think that through, it's quite interesting. Start with your phone and see how many you have. Second things is on choices. Are we truly given a choice to let our data being collected, how much, stored, where, aggregated with other data from what sources, again, we don't know, passed on, sold on, to whom, and for what purposes? I think a lot of work needs to be done in this. Finally, trust. I've mentioned my 3 adult children. The debate is raging at home. Should we or not be bothered about sharing our data and trusting organizations to use our data ethically? Traditional line at home is, if you don't have anything to hide, why would you worry? My answer usually, which is a little bit generation dependent, I recognize, I don't believe I have much to hide. I am absolutely sure I do not want to share all of my life with every organization. And I'm still pretty sure I'm not paranoid completely. So I think so awareness, choice, and trust, that nicely spelled for ease of remembering, ACT. I think that's something we need to work, all of us together, both the public, which, by the way, we're all in it, and the organization. Alex Pentland of MIT talks about the need of a new data deal. My colleague, Carlo Gagliardi, talks about putting the customer in charge of their data. I think this is very important to promote more awareness, more choices, and more trust. One final observation, if I may. I think I'm still within the time.
No. But make it anyway.
You know that when we stop exercising, the muscle mass just kind of shrinks. If we continue to see more decisions being made by software algorithm, artificial intelligence, any type of automatic things you want, I think we'll lose opportunity to practice decision making. Obviously on the most simple one. And so on the one hand, it will save time. On the other hand, fewer practice. What happens with fewer practice? That's a conundrum for me. I'm not too sure whether the long-term effect we will compensate and will be good at different types of decision making, or we'll have lost the ability to make good decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This session is called Big Data, Big Danger, so I'd like to talk about 3 big dangers. Firstly, the danger of generalization. We have a debate about big data that becomes polarized into a black and white, big data is good, big data is bad argument, and we lose the specifics. Secondly, there's a danger of too much focus on technology and the collection of data and not enough on how data is being used. And thirdly, we admit defeat when it comes to the law on the basis it's all a bit too hard, we don't understand the algorithms or the technology anyway, so we can't do anything about it. So, returning to my first danger, the danger of generalization, I'd like to read to you this definition from the management consultancy world, and I should emphasize it's not written by PwC. Big data is high volume, high velocity, and high variety information assets that demand cost-effective, innovative forms of information processing for enhanced insight and decision making. I have to say I prefer Yann's definition. And that sort of, the one I've just read tends to make me a bit cross, because I think those sort of buzzwordy definitions don't help us to make judgments about the dangers or otherwise of big data. Even the term big data is unhelpful. We might be talking about very large data sets or different sources of data, or a little bit of data about lots of people or things, or lots of data about a small number of things. So, as Yann was saying, I think we need to ask questions if we want to make a judgment about big data. So we need to find out what data is being collected or generated. Is it provided by an individual? Is it observed, for example, through cookies? Is it derived data? Is it inferred from analytics? Why is it being collected? What's been done with it? By whom? What decisions are being made because of it? And how do those decisions impact on individuals or on society? Which brings me to my second danger, that's of too much focus on technology and collection and not enough on how personal data is used, which is often the point at which harm may occur. Data protection law has tended to focus on data collection as at the key point that the individual is given choices, and on suppression of data as a way of protecting individuals from harm, such as the recent right to be forgotten decision. But in today's environment, we're often talking about information that's already there. For example, it's being collected by a mobile phone company as part of providing the service, or it's been posted on social media by individuals, or it's been generated by a hospital as part of the treatment that the hospital gives to patients. So I would argue that it's how that data is used that should be our focus and the focus of regulation. So if we go back to the mobile phone data, that data might be used by the provider to market other products to the customers, and we might say, fair enough, provided they stop if we ask them to. The company might pass aggregated data to a local council to help that council monitor traffic speeds or decide where to repair roads. And again, we might say fair enough, provided that there are no names attached and we can see the public benefit of that. But what if the mobile phone provider itself combines the data with other available information in order to predict where the next crime hotspot will be? It sells the results of its analysis, so not the data itself, to an insurance company, which then ups the home insurance premiums of people living in that predicted crime hotspot. So what's the harm? The mobile provider has not passed on any individual details. It anonymised the data before carrying out its analysis. And this type of analysis has actually been carried out by Pentland from MIT and others using human behavioural data from mobile phone activity in London, so maybe some of your activity in this room, in combination with demographic data, with the authors claiming that their analysis increases the accuracy of prediction of hotspots when compared with other methods, something like from 64% to 70% accuracy. But again, alarm bells might be ringing with some of you in the room. Why? Perhaps we are concerned about decisions that ultimately affect individuals being taken purely on the basis of an algorithm that we don't understand, firstly, and might not turn out to be 100% accurate. Is this something that should be allowed? I think we should be prepared to judge. So thirdly and finally, the law. Are the issues raised by big data so difficult that we can't expect the law to tackle them? I would say not. But if we continue to focus on consent and hiding data as ways of regulating big data, I think we will ultimately fail. There's often no real choice for the individual but to provide his or her data in order to receive a service, and therefore the requirement for consent at the point of collection is weakened as a way of ensuring fairness. So we don't want a data collection free-for-all, I'm not advocating that, but I think that equal or even more focus needs to be put on use of data. So if we as a society wish to prevent or minimise use of information that may be damaging in particular contexts, we should implement rules to do that by way of laws in some circumstances. Obviously, no law will be successful in preventing all harmful activity, but I think we must at least have a go at making new and better law when it comes to big data. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Sandy.
Big Data Part 2, this time it's personal. When Timandra and I discussed this subject at a Battle of Ideas debate last year, I made a lot out of the metaphor of low-hanging fruit for big data, meaning something that's abundant, previously tended to be overlooked. We now have the means to collect it in vast quantities. It's valuable, it's useful, but it risks distracting us from the task of putting in the effort to get the good fruit from further up the tree. There's another metaphor comes to mind, particularly when it comes to the use of big data to understand humanity, rather than, say, to help discover the Higgs boson or some other aspect of the inanimate world. And that's the metaphor of dreaming. Big data about humanity is ourselves representing ourselves to ourselves, which is what we do when we dream, an unconscious process of sifting, rather than a conscious process of self-reflection, at least until the likes of Sheila get their hands on the data and do purposive intellectual work with it. But the unconscious process of working with data, or of seeing where data leads us, it can unlock valuable ideas, as indeed can dreaming. Dreaming helped Coleridge write Kubla Khan, it helped Kekulé a light on the structure of the benzene molecule, and it helped Agent Cooper find out who killed Laura Palmer. I wouldn't knock it. But the dream state's disavowal of conscious purpose and its outsourcing of the work of thinking to sort of mechanical processes can only take us forward so much and so long. At last year's debate, a colleague in the audience, who may be here again today, upbraided me and put it to me that it's quite legitimate to regard an individual as simultaneously being a human being with all the qualities that entails, and a data point. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. And I think he was quite right. You know, for some intents and purposes, it's legitimate to regard humans as data. The interesting question is, when is it legitimate to do this? Who can legitimately do this? Natural scientists have long since done it with respect to our biology, and that's fine. Social scientists have as well. That's more contentious and perhaps deserves to be regarded more critically. People have long since used data to sell things to us. Vance Packard was telling us about this 60 years ago. I'm relatively sanguine about that, but you know, with some reservations. I'm rather less sanguine about the government doing it. But the interesting thing about government and big data is, I think, politics becoming technocratic and decisions being based on algorithms and so on, I think those things happened logically prior to the literal use of technology and algorithms. I think evidence-based policy is as a concept, is a version of that. It's saying we should predicate our decision-making on data. And the problem with it is that it buries assumptions and opinions in places where it's hard to perceive them and hard to contest them. Now, that's true of decisions made by algorithms. Marion has just made the point very well. But it's true even without literal algorithms being used. It's true when politics is preoccupied with and justified in terms of evidence. Now, when it comes to researching our biology and our health, there are good reasons to treat people as data, and Sheila has touched on them. When it comes to offering us health care, it can become a bit more questionable. I'm not implacably opposed to government big data projects in health, like Care Data or the accredited Safe Haven scheme, although I think Sheila's high standards and safeguards should definitely be adhered to. I'm quite excited about big data genomics and projects like the 100,000 Genomes Project and the Personal Genome Project. The thing I'm most concerned about in respect of those projects is the erosion of the traditional distinction between health research and health service, because data in those two fields carries quite a different type of meaning, and eroding that distinction, which has served us very well for quite a long time, could throw up some interesting problems and difficulties. But perhaps the most difficult question we face, even notwithstanding what scientists and technologists and politicians do with data, is all of us forgetting how to regard ourselves and one another as something a bit more than data. It's related to the point Yann made about losing the muscle, the decision-making muscle when you rely on big data to inform your decisions. But it's even more profound than that. I think data is all too often, it's the way we get a grip on ourselves and one another, the way we make sense of ourselves. It's how we make ourselves tractable. In the previous session that Timandra chaired next door, the question, it was put as a challenge to data and evidence, the fact that Mike Tyson's brother, who grew up in similar circumstances, similar difficult circumstances, had become a surgeon. And the speaker sort of said, this shows the vagaries of chance. I don't think it shows the vagaries of chance. I think it suggests Mike Tyson's brother did bloody hard work and quite deliberately became a surgeon. I don't think he did it by accident. But the point of the anecdote is that when you start to understand the world as data, it becomes quite difficult to understand where things like progress and novelty and transformation come from. The answer people turn to increasingly when they think about that is the concept of emergence. It's a very popular term, buzzword, increasing in prominence over the past 10 or 20 years. And it's a concept that's traditionally used to mean complex and unpredictable outcomes arising from simple initial rules. And increasingly, the social dynamics that distinguish humans, the process that's going on in this room at this very moment, all of us here are sharing and developing ideas together. All of those dynamics tend, from not only natural scientists' point of view, but social scientists' point of view, to be parked in a category nowadays called environmental, which sits alongside biological and sometimes stochastic, meaning random effectively. It's a very small contemporary toolbox we have in our evidence-based world for understanding how and why a human being is what they are and how and why we might move society forward in any given direction. Increasingly, anything novel or transformative that enters the human picture is understood as an emergent phenomenon. And I think what we need to remember, and what we've used in the past to understand progress, novelty, and transformation, is not emergence, but transcendence. Now, that's a word with very sacred connotations, and people find that off-putting. But I think it's quite an invaluable secular concept as well, because what's central to the concept of transcendence is human purpose and meaning, whether we're transcending our origins, or our circumstances, or our limitations. The point is that this idea of transcendence is purposeful, it's meaningful, and it's somewhat open-ended. I think new methods for the storage and manipulation and use and gathering of vast quantities of data are brilliant, are useful, but they cannot give us that transcendence. I think unless we put big data in a wider human perspective, rather than opening possibilities up, which it does to an extent, it will ultimately close possibilities down.
Again, got in just for the red card. Well done. Well, I have to say, on average, the population of speakers exceeded their time. And with that in mind, and also just the fact that this is a slightly shorter session, it's an hour and a quarter session, and I see there's a lot of you here, I'm going to come straight out to you to make some points and questions.
In the past, in terms of business, you could argue businesses were able to kind of make better decisions, but now, with kind of big data, they become very risk averse. So, does big data really drive better sort of decision making or not?
Is big data a platform for better judgement, or is it just a sign of more risk aversion in decision making, trying to hedge your bets and protect yourself, that kind of thing? Okay, good, thank you.
I can sense some skepticism in the panel in terms of the value of the big data. So then it's kind of interesting to hear your view. If you were asked a question to analyze or not to analyze, would you rather not analyze at all? And just in general, what's the big difference between big data and all the data statistics and analysis we've been doing so far?
To lay cards on the table, I think big data does have huge potential for health issues. But I do have some concerns around data and decision, and particularly in relation to data disembodied from a social relationship. And a term I heard in a debate yesterday, which was liberal paternalism. I am not a liberal paternalist, just to be clear on that matter. But particularly, and I think these things are tricky, particularly when Sheila was talking about a really tragic case in which somebody was HIV, and you could see that, you knew that. they didn't declare it, and 8 years later, unfortunately, they died. And then you've got the prisoners the ex-prisoners that you were tracking for problems with drugs and what would happen to them. At what stage do you say people have a volition to act as they would? And at what stage does data come in and start seeping into the relationship between a GP, for example, and somebody who might be suffering from drug addiction? I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about a minority, and it might be a bit science fiction, but I am concerned about a sort of minority report aspect on this. I think it's extremely difficult, and some of these decisions are tough, but I am concerned about the chipping away, even under these difficult circumstances, of actually people making their own judgments and the relationship between an individual and the people that they around them trust.
So the slippage between observing something now, making a statistical prediction, applying that prediction to actual people and what you do about it.
The elephant in the room when we're talking about big data, perhaps is GCHQ and NSA, and I'd like each of you to respond at some point, where we have the deepest data mining with the least regulation.
We need to sometimes be a bit careful that big data doesn't become a scapegoat for unethical behaviour. Just because you have data about something doesn't mean that you have an excuse to make a bad or immoral or prejudicial behaviour. The decision and the responsibility still lies with the people who make those decisions off the back of it. So it's really to remember that what we do with it is really what makes the difference.
At the end of the 18th century, the Spanish painter Goya produced a series of prints, the most famous of which is entitled Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, which is an etching of a man falling asleep at his desk and all these wild animals appearing out of his dreams. At the time, and this was completely unproblematic, what he meant by that is that reason needs to be continually vigilant against the monsters that will crop up if we're not careful. Later interpretation of this very same image seems to be almost the opposite. There is actually reason which is responsible for the monsters, which is more or less the sleep of it. It's more or less the plot of the dialectics of enlightenment from the 1940s, Horkheimer and Adorno. It's also, I think, simultaneously the plot of a film, a very great science fiction film a few years later, the Forbidden Planet, where the great machine can automatically produce whatever you reason into existence. It makes your wishes come true, but simultaneously the id, the hidden bits, the nasty bits of consciousness, they form a monster which wipe out the entire inhabitants of the planet. So, if I can come back to sort of the subject, which you might have been wondering if that might happen, the picture that we're being given about, about big data is largely sort of, well, the problems or maybe the benefits that come through the sort of less conscious, the emergent, as Sandy put it, aspect of this. But what happens in light of this when actually reason itself has largely come to be seen as far less fruitful and far more toxic than previously used to be the case.
We've done a research survey over the summer, 1,000, we call them executives, self-declared, on organization, and it's really focusing on whether people use big data, data analytics to support big decisions for their organization. Organization can be large and small, government or not, NGOs. And it was the one piece of result that came through that was a bit of a shock to us. 41% of the respondents used first their own experience. 32% of the respondents used the experience of their colleagues and trusted friends. 22% thought that big data, data analytics, actually it's phrased data and analytics was the most important one. Sorry, it's in the order of what's most important. 42%. So if you look at this, whether that's risk averse or not, I think there's still the vast majority of people are not using big data in the real world today to make big decisions. That was my first point. The second one that I wanted to pick up, if I may, moral and misuse of big data. I think for me, the fact that it's big data or not is kind of sort of irrelevant. Really, it's all about whether it's a new advance, it's the next big thing, or it's the current big thing. It used to be called applied statistics. It used to be called with smaller set of data, to be fair. But it's all about individual moral compass. If you don't have that one, whether you use big data or not, you'll not behave properly. And big data augments potentially the magnitudes of the error, it augments the impact of the error. But that's it. It's simply the normal evolution of the rest of it.
So big data can't decide our morals for us?
I'm afraid not. Not yet.
I think that when we translate from data to information, we do so via analysis. And so in that sense, I see analysis as part of Sandy's transcendence. There was the question to analyse or not to analyse. Obviously, if data were obtained under duress, that would be against professional codes of conduct to analyse such data. If the data are poor quality, then I would be quite likely to take a view that I would not waste my time on those data. Often in databases that have not been well designed, about the only thing that you can really rely upon are event dates. And for that, they can be quite good. You know, the sequence of events that happened to somebody. There are criminal justice events, there are hospitalization events, and so on. The times of in and out of hospital, in and out of prison, you can rely upon that, a little bit about the diagnosis, but not much else, not necessarily about the management of the individuals in the course of those stays. But you can go a long way by analysing event sequences, and they can be highly informative. So, yes, there is judgment brought to bear on what to analyse, what to spend time on. Sometimes the question is so important that you have to try to do the best you can with whatever data are available, but you hope that as part of your analysis, you'll then end up with recommendations on how to improve the collection of data in future. On the question of the HIV-infected prisoner, of course, it was that man's choice, and his choice about his health we have to respect. But in terms of the overdose death soon after release from prison, of course, we don't stop at having identified the high risk. We then set about, and the prison service have set about, as well as we, trying to test interventions that will bring that risk down. Because, of course, we do work in the public health not only to identify the risks, but to do something about them.
The serious case review into, I think, is it Solihull Hospital, where the breast cancer scandal occurred. And the author of that serious case review talked about how asking for more and more data was used by the management of that hospital to avoid making any decisions about the particular surgeon. And so I think there is a risk that data becomes a way of avoiding decisions, and sometimes those decisions are difficult ones. I mean, in all the recent child abuse scandals, there was lots of information out there, but no decisions being made, and that is, I should be of concern, I think. So, as I think this person made the point in the front row, that it's what we do with the data that's going to be so important, whether we use the data for good reasons or bad reasons, what decisions are made as a result of it. So I definitely agree with that. But I'm not actually hugely sceptical about the benefits. I can see that there are benefits of big data, certainly in the health law enforcement field. You know, we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we need to be looking at every single situation as they come. And I'm going to have to tackle the elephant in the room, the GCHQ NSA question. I'm going to put myself in the rather unfashionable position of actually giving a little bit of support to the law enforcement security services in terms of their use of data. Because I think, you know, there is a lot of emotion out there about this subject, and I think it does tend to sometimes stop us looking at exactly what's going on. I mean, in order to detect trends and links between those who are involved in terrorism, etc., sometimes big data is a way of doing that, or using large databases in order to perform cluster analysis, etc., is a way that linkages can be obtained, and those can be useful intelligence items to enable those involved in law enforcement to move forward with an investigation. However, I do think that there does need to be, as Sheila was saying earlier, more transparency about this whole area, and it needs to be further, you know, an issue for further debate.
I'm not very sanguine about GCHQ, etc., aggregating data. Having said that, if modern-day terrorism is amenable to prediction and understanding by studying data in that way, it actually tells us something about the terrorism, not just about the authorities. I mean, it suggests something somewhat devoid of purpose and principle, at least compared to some historical antecedents. But no, you know, Yann asked earlier, what have I got to hide? You know, your family debate you were having. Well, what you have to hide is your private life. Everyone's entitled to one. Your data is not the same thing as your privacy. And that's a mistake that's too often made. But it is contiguous with it in some ways. And I do think we should have an instinctive scepticism of the authorities gathering and using data on us, even for security purposes. The interesting thing about moral decisions and data being used as a scapegoat, following the mid-staffs scandal, there were some very interesting policy announcements and interventions by David Cameron and so on, you know, effectively trying to make compassion something that could be understood as data. You know, a target, you could have compassion targets, you could inculcate compassion in people, you could train it, you could make it a condition of someone's nursing degree, all of which completely fails to understand what compassion is and actually kills any possibility of it. It's something freely given by an individual human, or it's nothing. You know, you will and I find it interesting that we're ascribing so much agency and importance to data at the same time as effectively trying to turn healthcare professionals into machines through the way we talk about them. I mean, there's schemes to help people understand compassion involving iPad apps, dummies in pajamas, what's called a human patient simulator. You know, the data approach to compassion in healthcare is a really stark example of a complete failure to understand what compassion really is, what human beings really are, and why it is they do what they do. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. I know you want to chip in on GCHQ, but I'll come back to you. We have time left for another round of questions.
I am a big advocate of big data and what I think it can do in the future. I think what it will do for productivity, etc., for supply chain management, etc., etc. I think those things are going to be absolutely transformational. But there are some big political, ethical, moral questions that have to be asked. And the question that I'd like to raise with you is what I refer to as this kind of algorithmic fatalism. That what's going to happen is that we're going to have all this data collected about us and what we do in our lives. And this is going to be presented back to us to try, basically when it comes to business, is to sell us more stuff. Okay, so you bought a book on Amazon last week, now you're going to, this is what you should be reading next, or etc. So it's kind of this idea that somehow our lives can be made more meaningful by having this data presented back to us, which in fact, I think this talks very much to what Yann was raising and what Sandy spoke about. It's about the precision of algorithms now being presented to us as having better outcomes for us and actually elevating this above our own subjectivity and above our own decision-making ability. And that's a very fundamental transformation and a shift in the way that we look at these things in society, because I think that's got huge implications for the future. You know, Descartes made the point, I think, therefore I am. What is it going to be in the future? You know, I think I exist, or at least there's an app that says I exist because it's collected data and it's been presented back to me. This is what I should be doing next. I think there's a very big difference between the human beings being the subject of all of this rather than our data then becoming the subject and us becoming the object.
Twitter ergo sum.
I just wanted to know the panel's viewpoint on open data, specifically health. There's a lot of research being done out there and allowing hackers or anybody out there doing research, specifically going back to Sheila's point about research backbone.
Two quick questions. One, much of the discussion has been about, to some extent, the precautionary principle, if you come from environmental science. But does big data only mean big personal data, like big data about individuals? And secondly, there's been less discussion about the questions we could answer using big data, all about the risks of it. Like, what problems are we trying to ask, what things are we trying to solve?
The issue of using big data to make decisions and whether we're okay with that or not. I actually develop software for a living, admittedly not in big data. I'd kind of divide this down the middle into two lines. If you're making decisions based on big data, these algorithms, people write these algorithms. Yann spoke about, our reasoning muscle, if you will. There are still people behind these algorithms who are doing the reasoning, so I'm not sure big data is absolving humans of reasoning altogether. I think where I would draw the line is where we start to get to computers literally kind of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's a machine and it just gives you the answer, like the machine learning kind of approach to big data. And I think if there are no humans involved in a decision-making process, then that's a much deeper ethical problem.
The question about the algorithmic fatalism, great term. That actually, that's back to a real-world question again, isn't it? It's about how we engage with something, make decisions about what we may want and don't want, however clever the algorithm is and sends the next book or the sequel that thinks it may be something that we may want to consume. But actually, it's dependent on our actual judgment and decision-making about what we do. I do want to reiterate this thing about the obsession with evidence, though, and data, and sometimes as a substitute for actually making decisions. Because even during this weekend, I've been at a lot of panel discussions where quite prominent speakers have talked about the absolute evidence being out around certain issues. It may be to do with certain kinds of music and attacks on certain types of people. But there have been a range of examples where they say, the evidence all proves this. And I think that the thing about responsibility, there's this, like with crime as well, you see it with the police increasingly and with licensing in Britain, the whole notion that basically you have less and less judgment and less responsibility, but we just get presented with different figures, and rarely do we unpick them. So today we're told that crime shoots up. When you ask what it is, often it's things like mobile phones being reported stolen because people have been a bit tipsy and left them somewhere. There's not really serious crime's down. And I guess the point is really that it seems to me that we should seize the technology and use it for empirical and for logistical reasons, but then in other areas of life, in education, in terms of philosophy, who we are, and other areas, that's where we should be promoting judgment even more.
My comment also is related to the decision muscle. After 10 years as a statistician working in evaluation research, I'm usually, at the end of each project I've worked on, faced with policy makers, implementers or something, just sitting there and saying, okay, please tell me what I'm going to do now. And so I think it's not only people themselves, it's not only the researchers, it's also all the programmers, thank you for that point, but also for those on the receiving end of research.
We ought not to think that big data is synonymous with complete data. And I think what happens is the language set gets a little bit science fiction-esque in that we've got a complete data set. It's not true. Check the Decode program out from Iceland, where the whole of the Icelandic population had their genes screened, data was passed in. Turns out many of the fathers who were written down as the fathers weren't. Destroys the program absolutely immediately, because the data, though big and not complete, even if you have big data and complete, what you do with it is pretty tough. Think about weather systems, think about climate change modeling, think about tracking aeroplanes through the sky.
The worrying aspects of where you remove human beings from the process of collecting data. So, for example, I'm thinking of how children are dealt with, particularly between education and health at the moment. So, for example, a whole range of questions that may be posed to a nursery worker about a child. So, for example, they're asked to monitor a child. Are they late for school? Do they look tired? Are they messy, etc.? So all this information can be compiled and then passed on to a paediatrician. So a range of judgments have been made about this child by professionals before, say, for example, a paediatrician makes a judgment about the situation of a child, which may, entirely be innocent. The situation may be entirely innocent, but a kind of judgments have been made already without humans being involved in the process. So that the wrong questions that are being I'd question the questions that are being asked in the first place.
There was a brief mention about consent, and I want to come back a bit to consent, about the intersection between technology and law. And that's how, consent is based on trust. And the problem is that the data that we can give consent about is based on what we know about the context and the use today. If you think of when people first uploaded images online, for instance, they had no idea that there would be image recognition that can recognize where the picture was taken, who was in the picture, and that can be automated now as big data. So there is a big problem on the DNA database. We talked about the first DNA collection by the police. The law ruled out the database. The law caught up with the illegal database to make it lawful after it was created by the police. And again, the blood taken from babies to inform, to decide, to inform about whether they might have some disease that could be dealt with. This is being kept by many hospitals and might be DNA sequenced at some point in time. That's not something that was kind of known or planned or envisaged at the time of where the data was taken.
Maybe one of the differences with big data as opposed to just large amounts of data is that human analysis and conscious purpose and evaluation arrives fairly late in the process, in the sense that the data gathering happens first. The data is given rather than humans designing what data set to generate. A few years ago, it was announced in Wired magazine that the rise of big data meant the end of theory. That's to say, we no longer need to understand, we no longer need to understand causality, we no longer need to build theories. We can just rest content because correlation is enough. So it seems that at least some on the panel would like to challenge that. So I'd like to know, why is it then that, if you do want to challenge it, why do we still need theory? Why do we still need to understand causality? Why might it be that correlation is not enough?
Sheila. GCHQ, I'm an avid watcher of NCIS, and I hope that at GCHQ fingers fly over the keyboard as fast as they do on NCIS to arrive at solutions. The other aspect of that is being a lot more circumspect about how often you have your mobile phone on and which monitors you actually allow to track your movements. Algorithmic fatalism, fantastic phrase, but we do have an off button and we can just ignore offers that are made to us. The open data issue is, I think, a very important one, and there is indeed an intrinsic conflict between the need to have safe havens for analysts to do their work in and not be able to take the data away in case they may be able to make deductive disclosure, and the notion that all data can be open to anyone. These are are mutually contradictory, and we cannot have both. And I err on the safe haven side of that. Correlation is not causation. You get reverse causation, and you get bias in the data that come to you, the acquisition bias. You have to be concerned about how data were acquired, particularly when they are not designed, when the data collection system was not designed by you for a specific purpose. And so we always need to be concerned about how data are acquired and whether, in fact, you can take an association to have anything at all to say about causation.
Thank you. Yann?
So I'll start with complete data. Well, it's rarely complete, completely agree. Sometimes it is complete, and it has been designed to be exactly what you need, until it's not, because new data comes in, and so it's an evolving picture. That brings me to the multidimensionality of all the projects we work on and all people in big data work on, and the human being too. Is a human a point? I beg to differ violently, possibly. Think about how many dimensions we can think about it. So we're not talking about 2 dimensions, not 3, not 5, not 10, not 50, not 100. It's many, many more than that. So what is big data? It's the ability to take that richness, that multidimensionality, and take good shortcuts. And ideally, good shortcuts means a little bit of art also. And without that art, if everything, back to the machine learning point now that I'm trying to hit as many as I can, machine learning helps you try to get better shortcuts too. So I wouldn't toss machine learning on the side. And by the way, somebody says how different it is. 30 years ago, we were doing artificial intelligence already, so that's not new either. And I will end with Amos Tversky and Daniel Canaham, obsession with evidence. I have a fundamental problem with traditional design of experiment. It is a way to project your biases. So there is you need to look at it from the two different entry points. One, you do your hypothesis, you design your experiment, you collect the data, you do the analysis, and you come to conclusion, yes or no, with statistical significance at the nth degree, whatever that is. Or you actually say, what am I trying to model? What is this phenomenon? What do I know about it? And if you have an hour, you spend the time to do a very rough cut model to do that. And the two approaches must work together. If you do only one, you'll be dead, and I'm finished.
Good, excellent. Marion?
I'd just like to comment on the obsession with data as a substitute for decision-making point, which I think was very well made. I just think we could think about the way that evidence is presented to a court, facts, information, accounts, stats, etc., is presented to a judge or a jury. That's not the end of the story. You weigh that evidence up and you make a decision, so you have to judge.
So T.S. Eliot, this is a much quoted phrase. He asked, where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? This has been quoted many times in debates about information technology. And the observation that conventionally follows is that if T.S. Eliot were alive today, he would have added the line, where is the information we have lost in data? But actually, things are going the other way. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was mentioned. Google is moving on from its knowledge graph to what's known as the knowledge vault, described as, I quote, a single base of facts about the world and the people and objects in it. Google is using the term knowledge to describe what's extracted from aggregate data using algorithms. Sheila was quite right to describe analysis as a process that helps transform data into information into knowledge, and the human work that's involved there. Google is using the word knowledge to describe its vault. I'm sure it will be a fantastically useful resource, but this base of facts around the world and the people and objects in it, these facts, there are no eternally indisputably true facts about the world. You know, humans are distinguished by their habit of not being satisfied with the world as they find it, and instead making the world as they want it. This is partly the point of hypothesis-driven research. It's about making the world at the same time as finding the world. That's not a bug, it's a feature. So, to conclude, let's not lock ourselves in the knowledge vault and subordinate ourselves to algorithmic determinism. You know, let's not throw away the key, let's leave the door open.
Please thank this terrific panel for a really interesting discussion.